Continuing on the topic of right-of-way, we have our next presenter, Jennifer Wisniewski from Caltrans right-of-way office, giving a presentation on the certification review process. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Great, thank you. Yes, as Kevin mentioned, my name is Jennifer Wisniewski. I do work in our headquarters office of appraisals and local programs. So we're going to take this opportunity to just go over the right-of-way certification and some of the things that you should be thinking about when you are getting ready to prepare that document, and things you should be thinking about during your right-of-way phase so that your preparing the document goes more smoothly, more efficiently. For the purpose of space on this presentation, we do have acronyms. I think most of them are probably pretty self-explanatory, but if you need to, you can always go back to this page if you're unsure of what the acronyms are actually representing. So the overview that we're going to talk about today, it's, the right-of-way certification, the purpose, the manuals and guidance that you should be utilizing, Caltrans oversight prior to the certification, the different levels of certifications that you can prepare, what we are looking for as part of your, when we're doing the review and the acceptance of your certification document, and then we'll go over some common deficiencies that we have found. So the right-of-way certification, what is it? It's your written statement that's summarizing what the status is of all of your right-of-way deliverables. It's needed for federal aid construction projects, and it's going to outline basically all of those real property interests that you have secured. So all of those parcels that you've acquired, maybe you've acquired in fee, or you've acquired easements or temporary rights, all of those are going to have to be documented on your right-of-way certification document. It's going to outline any physical obstructions. The two big ones that need to be identified is if there's utilities in the project location and those that need to be relocated. And it's also going to outline any railroad approvals that you needed if we're working in, closely into the vicinity of some of the railroad lines. It's also going to talk about relocation. So those people that we've acquired property and you're going to have to relocate them and they're considered displacees. You're going to be outlining the status of those. And basically, you're also going to be just documenting that you are following the federal regulations, the Uniform Act, and the state laws that apply to right-of-way. So right-of-way certs are required for any project that has a PS&E. They basically are kind of tandem documents. Our right-of-way cert is going to be consistent with what you've outlined in your PS&E package. You're going to need a right-of-way cert anytime you're going to get federal reimbursement. That's a requirement. If you have an emergency project, right-of-way certs are still needed. However, you can start your work prior to actually doing the right-of-way document, but it would still be needed if you're getting federal reimbursement for that. In the case of emergency projects, I would suggest work with your local Caltrans office to ensure that you're handling that right-of-way certification in the manner that you're supposed to. Now, right-of-way certifications, there's manuals and guidance that's out there for right-of-way work. And the two Caltrans reference manuals that are out there is the Local Assistance Procedures Manual and the Caltrans Right-of-Way Manual. The Local Assistance Procedures Manual is written for off-system projects. It does outline, some of the requirements, details some of the processes. The Caltrans Right-of-Way Manual is, in fact, the FHWA approved manual that has all of the regulation requirements and the state law requirements that you need to follow for your right-of-way deliverables. So you will actually be needing to look at both. The Local Assistance Procedure Manual has a Chapter 13, which is devoted to right-of-way. It also has Chapter 14, which has has been written to get more into the weeds for right-of-way utility relocation work. When it comes to utility relocation, the LAPM Chapter 14 is probably going to be your primary resource, because those are the forms that you'll be utilizing. We've actually created forms for you to use in utility relocation world that are in Chapter 14. The other thing is, I mean, the manuals are, sometimes they're hard to read, hard to navigate, and you can get your additional guidance from your district right-of-way offices. We have 12 district offices. Each of our right-of-way offices has a local programs unit. Their role is to work with all of the local public agencies to ensure that you're aware of what needs to occur. They look at your right-of-way cert. When it's time to cert, they'll look at your documents. So I would just say you can contact them if you have questions. If you've been looking through the manuals and you're still unsure about certain things, that's your primary resource. So for steps for successful and efficient certification acceptance, the very first thing is early engagement with your Caltrans district local programs office. They need to know what's happening in your world for your local programs or your local transportation projects. And the document that's going to give them the first insight is the preliminary engineering right-of-way form. That's the per exhibit 13E. You're going to be submitting that early in the environmental stage. That will be submitted to the district office. That clues them in that this is something that you're working on. It will give them an idea of what kind of right-of-way requirements you might have, so that they're able to plan accordingly as to how they're going to need to work with you and how they're going to have to review your documents for oversight. And that is what we call our real-time monitoring. So we have real-time monitoring that is needs to occur for your LPA right-of-way activities. We have a stewardship and oversight agreement with FHWA, and as part of that agreement, FHWA has essentially designated Caltrans to be the oversight authority on your local projects for your right-of-way deliverables. So we have our real-time monitoring process. It's outlined in the manuals and the LAPM. So essentially the way that we handle that is generally we're going to be looking at a percentage of your right-of-way documents as you're working on your documents. So when you are doing an appraisal, you'll be sending some of the appraisals in, we'll be reviewing it, giving you basically the thumbs up that they are regulation state law compliant. And as you're moving on to your acquisitions, etc., we'll look at those. The sampling I mentioned is generally 15%. If there are deficiencies that are being found in those documents, it could be more. Essentially, those deficiencies have to be corrected, or you will not be able to get your right-of-way cert accepted by Caltrans. The local programs office that you have kind of been working with and you've advised of your project early on, they'll let you know what parcel documents they want to look at as part of your project. And then, as I mentioned, by doing this early, there is ample time to correct any deficiencies, so you don't jeopardize your federal reimbursement before certification. We still have local public agency right-of-way certifications that show up that we have not had the opportunity to look at any of the documents. And in that case, usually certification, you're under crunch time, you need that signed. If real-time monitoring has not occurred, they're going to hold the certification and they're going to do it at that point. And then if there are problems, obviously there's going to be, there's not going to be adequate time for you to correct those deficiencies. So just make sure that you work closely with our Caltrans offices so that you don't have any issues when it comes to certification. One of the big things to make sure that you're successful in certification acceptance is giving Caltrans adequate time to review There are different levels of certifications, which I'm going to be talking about. They have different requirements as to review, who has to actually review it within our Caltrans organization. We know that quite often you guys are delivering right away. The certification is needed immediately. We understand that, the expedite, but try to build in that adequate time so that you're not, it'll make it a little less stressful for you and for us when we're looking at those documents. Ensure the information on the certification is accurate. You want to make sure it's comprehensive and it's consistent with the PS&E plans. We do look at the PS&E in collaboration with reviewing the right-of-way cert to make sure that those things match up. There are required attachments that should be part of the right-of-way certification. Now, the first one is the resolution. We need to know whom within your local public agency has authority to sign that right-of-way certification document. That's generally handled by a resolution that's signed by the city or county or whatever the board. You need to make sure that the district Caltrans office, that is your primary point of contact, that they have the most current resolution on file. You do not need to submit this resolution with each certification. Once we have one on file, they will keep it and they'll refer to it when certifications roll in. But be proactive if there are any changes to who in your organization is going to have authority. Be proactive in forwarding that document to us. You don't have to forward it with the cert. You could certainly just email it in and let them know that this is a change. They'll file it away for whatever future certs come in. Another thing that has to come in with the right-of-way certification document is the FHWA specific authorization and the approval of the utility agreement. That is the document that we're signing off when you have utility relocations and you have liability to pay for those, then you're going to want to get federal reimbursement. We need to sign that document as part of the right-of-way certification. So make sure that is an attachment. And then, as I mentioned before, the PS&E, because we do need to look at the PS&E and make sure that the right-of-way covers what is outlined in the PS&E package. There are 2 certification exhibits. We're in local assistance day. So what's up here is the LAPM exhibits, the 13A and the 13B. I do want to make a note for those of you in local public agencies that also do work on our state highway system. Those are certification exhibits that you would use out of our right-of-way manual, chapter 17. But for the purpose of here speaking to off-system federal aid projects from local assistance, you've got the 13A exhibit, which is considered what we call the short-term right-of-way local assistance project certification. That is the simpler document. Essentially, you have no right-of-way acquisition. That would be no fee, no temporary rights, nothing that you would add any interaction or rights that you needed to get from property owners. Therefore, no relocation assistance. This certification, the only thing that would be on it is if you had minor utility relocation involvement, and that would be limited to just cover adjustments. Anything that goes beyond cover adjustments would go on to the exhibit 13B. That 13B is a standard right-of-way form. It is going to have an area for acquisition of property rights, utility relocations, railroad relocation of displacees, etc. The Code of Federal Regulation gives some flexibility when it comes to right-of-way certification. So what we have devised is we have different levels of certification. You'll need to know which level you're at when you fill out your certification document, because you're going to be identifying that level on the form. The primary certification level, the one that you should always be building into your schedule to achieve, is the certification level 1. This basically, this document is, there's no acquisition. you have, if there was acquisition, you have full legal and physical possession of all of those parcels. So what that allows you is you can advertise and award the construction contract. So as I mentioned, this is what you should be striving for. Any other level is going to require additional work. But you do have, if you're not quite there with all of your property acquisitions, there is potential that you might want to certify with a lower level, which it could be a certification level 2. What that is it's basically giving you your physical possession, but maybe possibly not all of your legal rights have, you don't quite have all of your legal possession yet. But what that could be is if you're able to, you might have property owners that are not, they might be in agreement to letting you out there and having access to the property, but they may not be in agreement, let's say, to price yet. So you're still in negotiations. If you're able to secure a document that gives you physical possession, possibly a right of entry or a possession and use agreement, you could certify at a level 2. Basically, it's saying that you have your physical possession. You can advertise an award, and you're basically saying to your construction contractor that comes on board, you have all the rights that you need. And then you'll continue with your negotiations and finish up those legal, the legal paperwork to close the loop. We now have what's called a certification conditional level 3. At the bare minimum, in order to certify at a level 3, you would have to have a resolution of necessity. So that would be something that you would have had to have had that obtained, and then you would be in the process of getting any kind of order for possession. With this document, you can advertise, but you cannot do bid opening. So in order to get to bid opening, you would have to upgrade this to a cert level 1 or 2. This is not utilized that often because of that fact. You're not ready for construction until you upgrade. But if you did try to pursue getting this, there is an additional document that has to be completed. And the reason being is because the Code of Federal Regulations states that this level of certification can only be used in extraordinary circumstances. So you would be required to fill out a memorandum of justification, and you would be required to submit that with the certification. And that's when you're going to outline what exactly is requiring the need for you to advertise at this time, rather than waiting until you have all of your acquisition property rights completed. There are complexities, obviously, with this level. There are additional approvals that are required. Normally, Caltrans will accept your certification documents in the district offices. When you're starting to get into level 3 certifications, they do have another level of approval that would be in our headquarters office. So obviously that does add time to the acceptance timeframe. There is an additional certification that's called a certification 3 with a workaround. Once again, you would have to have a resolution of necessity from your board saying that you absolutely need this, these property rights in order to do your transportation project. You might have an order of possession hearing and service dates, but they may not be effective. Again, it has to be used in extraordinary circumstances outlined in the Code of Federal Regulations. You would also have to do for this a memorandum of justification outlining the requirements, the need for advertising at this time. Unlike the previous conditional 3, where you would have to upgrade to a level 1 or 2 and you could not go to bid opening, the workaround certification level does allow you to advertise and award the construction package. But what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to identify your plan that shows that, yes, the construction contractor could get out there and start your project. There's a logical sequence of work that can occur, even though you have certain parcels that they could not or do not yet have access to. So there would be a realistic plan that you would have to put also within that memorandum of justification, because you have to be able to reflect that there's not going to be any delay. You could advertise an award and there's not going to be a delay for the construction contract to start. So that's something to consider when you're at this level. You also would have to update this certification. You don't have to upgrade it to a higher level, but you would have to update it 15 days prior to bid opening. And the reason being is they're going to want to capture within the contract specs for the contractor where things are at. So you might have actually closed some of your acquisition. So you're just giving a final update as to, are there still workarounds, or potentially did you have you closed some of those where they're no longer workarounds? You know, the other two things outside of, you know, appraisal and acquisition of property rights is railroad coordination and utility relocations. The railroad coordination and utility relocations, they do not play into the different levels of certifications. You have to have, and this is stipulated in the Code of Federal Regulation, they phrase it as you have to have all necessary arrangements. So if you have railroad coordination, if you're working near or in the vicinity of a railroad, all of that has to be, all of your paperwork, any approvals that are required, that has to occur prior to certification. There's no way around that. The same goes for utility relocations. You do have to have your utilities identified, you know, what's in conflict. You've had to notify the utility companies already. If there's liability, you would have an agreement with those utility owners identifying who's going to do the work, when it's going to happen, and then, you know, who's basically going to pay for that. So that all needs to be coordinated prior to certification. And then previously mentioned, you know, if you have federal reimbursement on a utility relocation, there is the exhibit 14C that you would also be submitting. Once you certify it, do a right-of-way certification document, it's generally, you're done, except if you have a circumstance where it is over a year old. So if you have not advertised, you may need to actually update your right-of-way certification. And yes, that would require that you get another signature from Caltrans for that new updated certification. And then, as I mentioned before, the other area where you would potentially have to update a right-of-way certification after the initial document is if you're using one of those right-of-way level 3 certs. So what we're looking for in review, we are looking that the real-time monitoring has occurred. We want to know that, yes, we've already looked at all of your deliverables. We looked at some of your appraisals, some of your acquisition contracts, etc. Everything was good to go. They were Uniform Act compliant, state compliant. So if that has already occurred, then it really is, you know, as simple as looking at the certification document itself and making sure that it is corrected. If we have not had the opportunity to do that monitoring, we'll have to set the certification aside until we do it. So make sure that you do your early engagement with the district offices. We are looking at the, to make sure you're using the correct exhibits. As I mentioned, there's on-system forms, there's off-system forms. So we want to make sure that you are on the appropriate exhibit. Also, the most current version. There are changes to the forms. There are language that is has to be updated. So make sure that you look in the LAPM and grab the most current document. If you were to submit an older one, it may be something that would have to go back to you for an update. That's adding time to it. So just be cognizant of that. And then make sure that it comes in with that required documentation that we had asked for. Make sure it's complete, all your appropriate statements are checked, and then your specific authorization and other attachments are there. Some of the common deficiencies that we found are that quite often with temporary construction easements and when you're getting temporary rights, we do have to look at those to make sure that if you've acquired temporary rights from a property owner, that it is going to cover the whole construction window that you need it for. So you need to make sure that you put your TC effective dates and the expiration dates on there. That's a requirement. It's outlined in the manual that you have to do that. It seems obvious, but quite often there are misspellings, acronyms that are used that we're unaware of, who you're speaking to. Keep in mind, this is what we consider a professional document. It does go sometimes outside of Caltrans. It could go to the CTC for review. It goes sometimes to FHWA for review. So seems kind of obvious to state, but be cognizant of the clerical issues that you might have in your document. That's not something that we want to present to our directors to sign when there's obvious things like that are on the form. We look to make sure it makes sense. Does it look like you acquired all of the rights that you needed? Does it look like if you had to speculate when you think you might have possession of a parcel, we look to make sure that it looks realistic, that you're not basically shortcutting the process. We look for inconsistencies. If you have the right-of-way certification and the justification memo, those documents should be in tandem. So we want to make sure that the information on both is consistent. And then we'll actually go through and make sure that you have all your parcels represented and anything that you might need. So that's essentially it. The one thing I just want to add also is I neglected to mention that when you're filling out a right-of-way cert, you are putting down the information that's needed as part of your project, what you've done as part of your right-of-way project. There's also a notation on that cert that you are signing, attesting that you are aware of the regulations that you must follow and that you have in fact followed that. So you just want to make sure that you are looking at those manuals, you're following the correct guidelines, and you're working with our Caltrans offices to ensure that happens. Kevin, or if there's any questions, Kevin, can you let me know?
Thanks, Jennifer and Lisa. We'll take questions for the two presentations on right-of-way. You may have noticed that questions have been coming in and being answered in the Q&A. So if you can take a look at the Q&A, you'll see questions and answers. One of the questions and answers I wanted to highlight, give you, Jennifer and Lisa, an opportunity to add anything. There's a question about, what if a project is in the process of submitting the right-of-way certs, but did not submit the preliminary right-of-way form because they were not aware of the form? When was the form first introduced? And the answer was, for current projects that have already initiated the right-of-way phase, Caltrans is not going to require those agencies to go back and submit a 13E. So I don't know if you have anything you wanted to.
Yeah. The preliminary engineering right-of-way form, I'm going to say was introduced about 1.5 to 2 years ago, possibly. It's newer. And it is something that was introduced so we can get earlier engagement and have a better idea of what projects we may see come across our desk. So at this point, there are some certifications, some projects that are ongoing that we did not have that. That's fine. Any projects that you have in your future, just be cognizant that that's something that you should be submitting to us.
Another question, how much time should be built into the right-of-way schedule for sampling?
The sampling is real time. So, if you had multiple, let's say you had multiple parcels and you were working on appraisals. I mean, as soon as the first couple are done, you should be getting that over for the check with Caltrans. If you're very, you're confident that your everything's fine, you can continue working on other appraisals. But just note that if there are deficiencies, fine, you might need to halt and make corrections on more than the ones that they've looked at. Generally, our offices, I would say, we don't have a set schedule. We never identified that you must give a certain amount of time, but I would say that it could be a couple days before, documents are actually reviewed in real time. But as we mentioned before, if you talk to your local programs office in the district that's assigned to your area, they can also advise based on workload and other projects that they have, they're reviewing. They could probably give you a better idea of what that time frame might look like.
And Jennifer, I don't know if you can pull up the acronym slide again, but we did get a question about the acronym RFA.
Oh, okay. And sorry, I don't know how to get back without going this route. That's a good point. The RFA is not here on the acronym side. So whoever brought that up, good catch. The RFA is I believe it's a local assistance document. It's your request for authorization for funding. And if I'm not mistaken, whoops, I don't know what slide exactly I've referenced to it for. Oh, when you're updating your certification. So when you are updating your certification, because it might be old, it might be more than a year old, then it's dependent on if you when you got your RFA signed and then when you are going to construction. So it's your request for authorization for funding.
All right. So as I mentioned before, we had a number of questions come in that have been answered in the chat or in the question and answer. If there are any additional questions that we can answer, looks like you are coming in here. Okay, let's see. Are environmental revalidation documents required as part of the NEPA clearance attachment?
You would. I mean, yeah, revalidating your environmental could be something that is needed depending on the length of time between environmental document and when you're actually going to construction.
Another question, if the project is not necessarily a new project, but we are requesting certification, is the checklist still needed?
The additional documentation, it would be needed for any certification. Except for the resolution that outlines who has signing authority, we can, we'll have the most current on file and we'll keep that one. But the other documentation would still be required if you had utility relocation, you wanted to get federal funding for that. So yes, you still would have to submit that right-of-way certification with the supporting docs.
Please clarify if a right-of-way cert needs updating, if TCE extensions are necessary.
You want me to answer that, Jen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, this is David Chavez here. I work with Jennifer in local programs, Caltrans headquarters office. No, you don't need to, if you're updating your TCEs to prevent them from expiring, because they need to be extended, whatever the construction ran longer than what you initially had intended. There is no need to update that right-of-way certification. Once the project's certified and into construction, there's no need. It would not require a need to update unless there was found work or additional right-of-way discovered that was necessary for the project once it started.
Thanks, David, for coming in and answering that question. Have another question. Is there a resolution template for granting authority for signatory for the right-of-way certification?
There's not one that we provide, no. That would be your internal, what your internal organization's requirements are when you're delegating signing authority for certain actions. We've seen some are delegated for a project, they're project specific, and who has signing authority for specific documents. We've seen some that are written more broadly for all real estate actions, etc. The more specific it is, the less questions we'll have, obviously, but there isn't necessarily a template where we state you must state this and it must, it must address each one of those things. But usually they're written in a logical manner where we're able to, with certainty know that that person who signed it is the one that has authority to bind your organization to it, essentially.
Another question for ER project, if there's no right-of-way required or utility cover adjustments are needed, do we still need to submit a 13A form?
If you have federal reimbursement that is going to be on that project, then yeah, you will need a right-of-way certification document.